had many oops moments on the podcast. There was one where I had to record it in a utility room in Canada. That wasn't great. And then there was one today, well, this week, sorry, where the audio went a bit wrong, and we had lots and lots of messages. So if anyone, I think Helen, I saw her nodding that she might have heard the wrong one, and E. O'Connell, sorry, I don't know what your first name is, but you obviously were early listeners, because basically, look at all these comments. I really thought you guys were demonstrating a tone of depth and voice. I was so confused. I thought there were guest presenters. I thought people were impersonating you. I thought you were poorly. In fact, a lot of people thought I was hungover. Like, a lot of people were like, Helen, you like sounded really weird. The sound went wrong. The sound went wrong. And so, like, loads of people listen to the podcast before it goes live, because they have to produce it, and we produce all the pod sheets. And everyone was a bit like, yeah, it sounded a bit weird, but we just sort of put it live. And then I listened on Monday night and was like, oh my goodness, this is not hungover Helen. This is like an issue with sound. So we had to re-edit it and republish it. So depending on when you listened, you will have either heard normal Helen and Sarah or very slow Helen and Sarah, and it was not some very clever intentional thing so that we could talk about pace. It was an editing issue. Okay, so I apologize. I was hoarse, Elaine. I've got a bit of a cold, and I had been out the night before, so I was a bit hoarse, but I wasn't slow. I'm never slow. I thought I'd been listening on 1.5 or something. No, sorry for any early morning confusion on Tuesday. It was an editing issue, which it will become a mistake moment for the team as soon as I have time to reflect on it. All good. Listen to the new one. It's better. So quite a few people have listened twice, which is good. Partly probably because the first one sounded weird. So we're going to dive into the topic of presence a bit deeper today, reflect on a few things we talked about, bring in some extra tips from you. First of all, the definition that we use on the podcast is that presence is about showing up in a way that has a positive impact, particularly in high pressure moments. So you can have kind of presence generally, but what we wanted to focus on is how you can sort of manage your presence, particularly in those high pressure moments when it can really make the biggest difference. So that's what we're focusing on. And what I think is important, because there's no kind of perfect presence. We don't all have to be the same in terms of how we show up in those high pressure moments. What's really important is that it is personalized. So I think for you to begin with, I think it is useful to think about, what does sort of personal presence mean to you? How do you want to come across in those high pressure moments? If you are really in control of your presence, you are having a positive impact in a high pressure moment, how would you want to come across? Because some people might want to be like calm. They might want to be like, I want to have a very calm presence so that they feel really in control in that high pressure moment. Some people might want to be, I guess, more collaborative. Like they might want to have a presence in that moment that's all about, we're all in it together. We'll get through this. What's that war, that Churchill kind of like Churchill spirit, old reference. Or they might kind of want to be a make it happen kind of presence, like a we'll get through it, so I'm on it kind of thing. Like there's no right, there's no wrong, there's just you. But the whole point about this, I think, is being a bit more conscious about your presence. The whole thing here is like, it's not just kind of unthought through. This is you thinking, how do I want to come across in those particular moments? And when I've got that insight, what do I need to do in terms of action? And the three things that we talk about in terms of the action that you can take, the first thing we talk about is kind of the words that you say, and actually more about how you say them. So less about the content of what you're saying, more about how your words come across. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more. We also talk about kind of what people see. So when they're kind of talking to you, when you're in those moments, what is it that you want people to see? And how does your kind of body language, the sort of your physical presence, how does that support what you want people to see? And then the last thing we talked about in the podcast, which we only touched on actually, I'd be interested if you'd like more of a podcast on this, because we talked about the role of power And this specifically this idea of something called soft power, which is almost like what attracts people to you. So in that high pressure moment, how can you almost be like a magnet for people to want that? How does your presence sort of have magnetism? That's what soft power is all about. I'll talk about it a bit more, but they were the three things that we talked about. But I don't think it's that useful unless you work out how you want to come across. Otherwise, it's just like loads of random stuff, and it's not going to be that personal to you. So I think part one of all this stuff on presence is you really thinking about how do I want to come across in those particular moments, and then kind of aligning it with what you're saying, like how people see you, and then how you're using your power so that people are sort of attracted to you, they're sort of magnetized to you in that moment. So before we get into some tips and stuff, I thought it might be useful just to reflect on our own thoughts about how do you want to come across in those high pressure moments, like what the hands we'll come on to it. So head into chat and let me know if you've got a high pressure moment at work, whatever that would look like. So mine would be like a book launch, or a day where I've got a lot on, or a particularly big session with like 1,000 people, that would be, or a stage session. They always feel a bit scarier. They are like high pressure moments for me. And it's worth you thinking about how, whatever your high pressure moments are at work, how do you want to come across? Like, what would you want people to think about you? So I would always want to be like kind of positive, can do, credible. Like that's how I always want to come across. So calm and capable, Karen, brilliant. Reg, calm, focused and confident. Confident, trustworthy and considered. I'm loving the alliteration, everybody. It's brilliant. Calm and positive, confident, engaging and memorable. Calm and collected, unlike today when I might feel panicked and stressed. Sarah has been calling me for the past week her very frantic friend. That is not a good thing. That's not how I want to come across, but unfortunately it might be a bit at the moment. Reassuring, Julia, calm and thoughtful. Self-assured, focused and calm. Quite a lot of calm, everybody. Wanting that calmness under the control. Brilliant. Okay, it is, and you know, our definition of it's how you come across in those with positive impact in the high pressure moments. It's also worth thinking about in the high pressure moments, is that the same as you'd want to come across in the low pressure moments? Is there consistency, or is there something different going on? I want calm, but it wouldn't be my authentic self. And Kat, I think that's the point. I would like to come across as calm, but that's not particularly me. Like that doesn't actually feel that authentic. I know that's what some people might need in that moment, but that doesn't feel like me. And so I think that is back to what feels like you in those moments. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into the how you say stuff, so it influences presence, what people see, and then how you use this power thing. And I thought what I would do is for each one, I would get some tips from you that you might have had, like advice that you might have had, because I feel like presence is one of those things that we all get given loads of advice on. So it's like, for example, my mum, I mean, I don't use this one, but my mum always used to say to me, Helen, if you want to have more influence in an interview, that's the high pressure moment she advised me on. If you want to have more influence in an interview, you've got to talk really quietly, because then people lean in to listen to you. I mean, don't do that. It's like, can you imagine? It's like you're whispering in a job interview. I mean, it's lovely advice, Mum. I appreciate it, but I don't do it. But what advice have you had? What advice in terms of the words that you say and the way that you say them? What top tips have you been given? What advice have you collected along the way in your Squiggly career? What sort of stuff's come up? I like that. Interesting, Steve. Sometimes I let some negative emotion show. Yeah, I actually find as somebody who is quite a positive person and uses positivity to influence, if I am not positive, it tends to have a bigger impact, because people know that there's something really wrong if I'm like, this is really shit. Okay, I've been told to slow down before. Yes. Never say, let me be honest. People will question if you've not been. Yeah. Honestly, when are you not honest? People always tell me to go with the flow. That's interesting. In terms of your words, Reg, or just in life advice, good posture. So that's kind of more about what people are seeing, but good one, Reg. Head up. Oh gosh, I can't think about this stuff and speak. Head up, shoulders down. God, that's the whole point about this, by the way. I don't think you want to be thinking about it so much that you can't actually be present. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't overthink your presence so much that you can't be present. That would be a bad thing. So I can't think head up, shoulders down and talk. It doesn't work. Kat, leave space for the other person to speak. Future Katie will do that. I love it. In Hannah, it's interesting. Hannah's writing about Katie. Replace Katie with your name. In You Coach You, we talk about in the confidence chapter, there is lots of research that when you're in a situation where you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, using your name, like Helen, you've done this before, you can do it again. But using your name actually is shown to be quite important for your self-belief. So slightly different point, but interesting. Slow down, listen more to senior people than constantly talk. I actually think that works the other way as well. Listen more to junior people. Like, don't assume that because they're junior, you shouldn't listen. I think it works both ways. Go with the flow in high pressure moments thing. Got it. The filler words. Oh my gosh, everyone. I'm going to say this now and you're going to listen to it all the time. I use so many filler words on the podcast. It's really annoying when I listen to it back. Like is my worst one. And I like annoy myself. Sarah uses so quite a lot. And we also use I think. They are our filler words. What else? Brilliant. Okay, loads of good stuff there. Thank you, everyone. So is mine. Yeah, the filler words. Oh, fix the fillers. Yeah, mine is I think, and then what else? Like, really annoying. I feel like I'm like a 14-year-old that just keeps saying that word. I mean, pause instead of fillers. Okay, Tip, I'll try. So in terms of what you say, let's talk about the pause one first of all. So it's interesting to think about how your pausing preference. So for example, when I'm talking, I am rubbish at pausing, but actually when you pause, you give more weight to your words because you're just giving people time for basically that stuff that you're saying to sink in. So pausing can be really effective. And I was taught, I mentioned this on the podcast, one of the ways that I was taught to practice this, I mean, it hasn't really stuck, but I should practice it a bit more, was to read a poem, so pick a poem that you quite like and record yourself saying the poem just in like your normal kind of pace. And then read the poem, pausing at the end of every line or at the end of every full stop. And don't think about it more than I need to put a pause in here, like pause for like 2 seconds or something before you say it next. And then listen back to what it sounds like your normal version and then the version with pauses. And it's so, their words have so much more weight, and it's a really good way of realizing like the power of the pause. But it is interesting kind of which one might be harder for you here. So pausing is a really good way to give more weight to your words. How do you cope in a room when every time you pause, someone jumps in? It's an interesting point. How do you cope, everybody? Has anyone got any tips on that? If you're trying to use pause to increase the weight of your words, but everyone sees your pause as an opportunity to make their point, what do we do? What do we do in that situation? IFOW. I've been known to speak to people about that. What is IFOW? Have I missed that acronym, Kat? You need to educate me. The Obama pause. It's a person. In my on-camera voice coaching, I call the Obama pause. He pauses a lot when he speaks. 5 comments up. Oh, I can't keep track. I can't keep track. I'm sure you can. Okay, so pausing is powerful. I don't have an answer really about what to do if people keep interrupting you, other than I would just call them on it. I would say, actually, I'd like to finish my thought, if that's okay. Or I'd say, can I just finish my point before we move on? That's normally what I would do. So the other thing, by the way, if people get interrupted, I think it's something that you can do for other people in meetings as well. So if you are in a meeting and you are noticing that a colleague is making a point and getting interrupted, I would hold the space for them. Like I would say, actually, I think Kat's trying to make a point there. Let's listen to that before we move on. So I think that's always a sort of a thing that we can do for each other. The other thing here is pitch. Really important thing around pitch. So high pitch, you can often use that to express energy, excitement, enthusiasm, but you might not always want it. There are certain situations where a lower pitch can create more gravitas. And again, lots of people ask me for the voice coach. I mentioned a voice coach that I had on the podcast. I've got a lower pitch at the moment because I've got a cold. it's not a good thing. But what I was taught was that when you're presenting in those high pressure moments, like an interview or, whatever the situation might be, what happens is our body just tenses up, because we're a bit like nervous. Everything gets really tense. And what happens is your vocal cords tighten, and unintentionally your pitch goes higher. So we might be trying to come across with lots of gravitas, but because we're nervous, everything just gets a little bit tight and a little bit high. And so what I was taught was, this is really weird, but I was taught to bend over, touch your toes, or however close you can get, depending on your current levels of flexibility, and like do some really, really big deep breaths, like really like basically fill your lungs and all this part of your body up here with air. And then you want to roll your body up like you've got one of those big, those massive inflatable balls. Like, obviously don't let anyone see you do this, but like big inflatable ball, like roll your body up. So you're basically keeping all the air in here. And then when you talk, this is all softened. And because you've got loads of air in your lungs, your pitch is naturally lower. And so again, just like experiment with it, like do it later, like do your voice, record your voice, like talking normally, and then do the bend air, roll ball, speak thing. And it's interesting to see how that can change your natural pitch. So something potentially to play with. The other one that we talked about was pace. So with pace, obviously, fast pace can be good again with like energy, enthusiasm, generating excitement, just speeding stuff up. But sometimes slow pace can be much better if you've got some things that you really want to sink in, some messages you really want to land, and you kind of want people to be sort of thinking with you. I sometimes find when I'm very fast paced, it's hard for people to think with you because they're just listening and trying to keep up with you. But if you go at a slower pace, you're basically bringing people's brains along a little bit more. It's potentially more inclusive to talk at that slower speed as well for people. Pretending to chew can open up your vocal cords. Tiff has all the tips. Pretending to chew. Obviously not on camera because that could also look strange. So Tiff's also got points on how to stop being interrupted. Someone once told me that they'd never seen a presentation where the feedback was you could have spoken a bit faster. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I had never had that feedback in my life. I don't know if I mentioned that we do sessions on all kinds of platforms, and recently I did one on WebEx, and there was a tortoise and a hare emoji, and people tortoised me to slow down. And I was like, I don't think I've ever been tortoised before, but it's a very quick way of giving me feedback. I like it. I think it might be more inclusive, Julia, because if you're slowing down, everyone can keep up, right? Whereas if you're speaking really fast, it plays to people's a certain type of kind of brain, I suppose. But yeah, I don't have science to say that. It's just kind of my thinking it through. Let me know, which one of those do you think you need to work on the most? Your pausing, your pitching, or your pacing? Which one of those do you think, I might have a bit of work to do? Yeah, Kat, that's part of why I have to do it, because we do a lot of global roles. Pausing, the pause. By the way, if you start researching pauses, you can get really into the detail of them. Like, there are all different ways you can, like the dramatic pause, the data pause, the let it sink in pause. I mean, it's all just a little moment of silence, but it's sort of like how you use the pause. I mean, there's loads of research on it. It's quite interesting. What's the difference between pause and pace? I could speak really fast and then leave a pause, or I could have, so my pace is kind of like how fast I speak. So I could speak fast and pause, if that makes sense. So say a lot really quickly, and before we move on, anything anyone wants to say, and then pause. But whereas obviously pauses is just the space between the words, and pace is how fast you're going. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's move on because we've got 8 minutes. Let's talk about the seeing stuff. So what top tips and advice have you had about your body language? Sarah gave me some years ago when we used to do, like, I'm talking like 2013, when we first did amazing stuff, and she was like, Helen, uncross your legs, it makes you look small and unconfident. I was like, I'm just cold. But I kind of always remember that. I'm quite a naturally cold person. And not in terms of my like personality, in terms of my circulation, and so I'm always like hugging myself like this, and I have to remember that sort of makes me look smaller on stage, so to kind of open myself up, because my natural thing is to like stay warm, so that I have to make sure that I don't look too small when I'm presenting. What stuff have you had? You can also use Team Speaker Coach to figure out your filler words. What a good tip! I did not know that. Interesting. Keep your feet firmly on the floor. Laura, I'm doing it as you're saying. It's very hard not to do this, as people advise. Feet firmly on the floor. Don't sit on your hands. Sit up straight. Okay, good tips. The best presentation I've seen recently was a Finnish national ice hockey coach. He had a huge range of gestures that he was obviously matching. This is point number 1, the gesture matching. So if you are a gesticulator, which I often am, we can use our hands very unintentionally because they're just sort of like flowing as we're speaking. And that can be quite distracting. So I've had lots of photos. I mentioned this, I think, on the podcast. I've had lots of photos of me speaking at events where basically my hands are like a blur. Like I'm doing some kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but it's because I'm obviously using my hands a lot when I'm talking. The photographer can't get me to keep still. But the point is really you want to use your hands to reinforce your words. So I was taught, for example, if you're like, I've got 3 points to make, you use 3 points on your fingers. Or if you're talking about one of the things I want to talk about in the future, use your hand to sort of like, kind of, I'm going into the future. Or it's really important that we take action. Like just think about what would the hand gesture be that would reinforce what I'm trying to say. Now, again, you don't want to choreograph a presentation because you'll be too focused on what you're trying to do with, like Simon says, you'll be trying to do too much stuff. But it is worth thinking, what are the 3 main points that I might want to make? And how does my body language make those points even more significant in terms of what people see? I think that's the thing. Like, what your killer message is, and how does your body reinforce that stuff? Someone told me to tie my head. As I run my fingers through it because it's distracting. Or have something else in your hand, maybe like so that you're not, if you're finding that you're fiddling, maybe like kind of having something in your hand could help. I always find, because we often present with our iPad, I've always got to hold this, so I can't be too fiddling because I've always got this in my hand. I was taught to box bookend with my hands to keep concise, wide open hands. Interesting. So the other stuff with kind of what people see is your posture. And what I would say is 2 things to think about in posture. First of all, your chair. Can I draw a chair today? Probably not. You get that that's a chair, right? It's a chair. So posture, also think about on camera, your posture. So what I'm trying to say here is when you're on a chair, and I mentioned this in the podcast, sometimes like our chairs, my chair's broken, I can't pump it down. But obviously you want to be higher. You want to have presence. You kind of want to kind of fill a space. And so if your chair is really low and I'm like this, you're missing some of me. And so always make sure that your chairs are at like an appropriate height in a room, so you've got good, it will help you with your posture. And I mentioned on the podcast that I was recorded once doing like a group exercise where they had intentionally pumped my chair down, and I sat on it without realizing. And when we watched it back, I looked like a really little girl trying to influence this situation, because I was like on the child's chair. I don't know if any of you have gone to parents' evening with your children, and they put you on the children's chair. It's really demeaning. I'm like, I'm a grown-up, give me the grown-up chair. But that's basically what it's like in these meetings. The other thing is, like, when what you might do might be like this virtual, just think about where you are. So I often have 2 pictures behind me and I put myself in the middle. Now, you don't have to do this, I do this for a living, but it's so that the eyes are going towards me. So if you've got a corner of the room, for example, I will often like have, so I'm in the center and I've got things that are pulling the eye towards me. Now, like I say, you might not need to do that for a meeting at work, but if there is a big high pressure moment, an interview or something you're doing where you're talking to a lot of people, you want to put yourself in the middle and make sure that things are bringing the eye towards you. Does that make sense? Like quite a small tactical thing, but posture and positioning, really important. Last but not least, this power thing. Got a couple of minutes, and this was only something we mentioned briefly. Has anyone got any tips on using power to increase presence? Because it is quite a nuanced thing. When we were researching it, this idea of soft power came up quite a lot. So we wanted to mention it, but has anyone been given any advice or tips on this topic of soft power? I am wondering whether we should do a little bit more on it, but basically, if you haven't, I can't say it. Soft power it's almost like attraction power. So it's not about being attractive. It's like what attracts people to you. So you've got more presence if like people are sort of they want to be with you. They want to listen to you. They kind of want to maybe even look at you because of this energy that you're communicating. And when we were looking into soft power, obviously the opposite of this is hard power, where you have to listen to me because I'm your manager or whatever old stuff went on. This is like, I want to listen to you because you've got this like magnetism, and it can come from 3 different areas. So the first way is content power. So if you are an expert in an area, like you know this stuff really well, that can make people want to listen to you. Like you can have presence because you know your stuff. You're like the expert in this area. So soft power can come from content, like you know it. It can also come from context. So you know how it's done around here. You know the politics, you know how it works. Like people come to you and they listen to you because you've been here maybe for a while. You get how it goes, and that has quite a lot of power as well. And then the other thing is connection power. So you've got lots of relationships. You have people are attracted to you because you're that person who knows lots of other people and they want to spend time with you because you're the connector, that kind of thing. And it is just interesting, I think, to think about if you were to increase your presence through soft power, which one of these things would be most relevant for you? Like, we don't all have to have all of them, but what are you the expert? Do you know how it goes around here? Or are you the person who has all those relationships that creates all that energy? And just in the last minute, what I would suggest that you do is you write down, maybe something to do after today. You write down, well, what is it that I want people to think about me in those high pressure moments? So I would want people to be like, Helen is like, when the hits the fan, or when it's really tough, or it's really hard, or when it's a stressful situation, I want people to say, Helen's optimistic, she stays very positive, she's really open, she doesn't close down, and she's always on it. Like, that's what I want. And then you might want to think about, okay, so in terms of the words that I'm saying, what's going to work best? And so for me, I think kind of a higher pitch because it's kind of positive, and probably a faster pace because it creates the energy is probably appropriate for me. What do I want people to see? Very open body language. I don't want them to be like, oh my gosh, she looks nervous and cold. I don't want them to think she's open and warm, and probably a little bit of movement for that energy. And then last but not least, the power that I probably trade off is connection. Like, I can bring these people in to help. Let's listen to what these people have got to say. I'd probably use that as my source of kind of soft power in a high pressure situation. So I think if you can maybe go away from today and just spend 5 minutes reflecting on this for yourself, it's a useful way to put all this stuff into action. Right, everybody, we are going to leave it there. I hope that has been useful. I don't know what we're talking about next week. Can't remember, but we'll be talking about something next week. And I think, Sarah D, are we doing PodPlus next week? Is it one of the last ones? When do we finish?
Yeah, we're doing it for the next 2 weeks. You're doing it next week, Helen, and then Sarah's doing it the following week. And then we're taking a break between Christmas, and we'll be back on the 12th of January. So last one pre-Christmas is the 15th of December.
There you go, everybody, 15th December. And Vivi from the team has just said, yes, next week it's career cushioning, the new term. Let's see what we all think about career cushioning. Brilliant.